Isaiah preached in desperate times. He lived in Jerusalem, and he was involved in an international crisis. Here it is. His people living in the streets of Jerusalem, they were stretched to the breaking point, full of pain, deep sorrow, full of fear. Hearts were heavy, just like ours. We live kind of in the same way today. They needed help. They wanted relief. They wanted deliverance if they could get it. Above all they wanted was hope. What was their problem? Rumors were flying that their countrymen and Jerusalem were under an impending military attack by the Assyrians. Glancing over the walls of Jerusalem, they could see the enemy on every hillside all around the city. The mood of the people, they were terrorized. There was a general panic. Everyone was saying, well, we've got to do something. But what are we going to do? Where do we start? They turned to Isaiah the prophet for answers. He will give us a strategy, so they thought. The sermon that Isaiah is preaching today is going to be my lesson. It's the forerunner of our Christmas story. It's found in Isaiah chapter 9. Isaiah the preacher, he starts out with this statement. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. Isaiah's vision of what was coming was charged with hope, and it was charged with all kinds of goodness. His people faced destruction, and he could see what was wrong with their world. He knew the Assyrians' brutality, but in the midst of Assyrians' devastation, something new was about to be born. He said, for unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. A new government is coming. With righteousness he shall judge the poor, and he's going to decide for the equity of the meek and the earth. And the earth shall be full of his knowledge of the Lord, and the waters are going to be just like his cover the sea. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. That's going to be Isaiah's sermon. Isaiah also added to his sermon this little note. In that day, the root of Jesse, King David, shall stand as an ensign to the people, and unto him shall the nations seek. A young adolescent boy was taken from his small village in Romania. He lived there with his mother and his dad and his little sister. And like Jerusalem, it was surrounded by an enemy. But they weren't the Assyrians. They were the German Nazis, World War II. They now surrounded that little Romanian town. He was taken into a concentration camp because he was Jewish. All Jews in Romania were all rounded up. That camp was called Auschwitz. At the train platform, the family was separated. He never saw his parents. He never saw his little sister ever again. They were sent to the gas chambers, never came out. That young boy's name was Elie Wiesel. He would never forget that first night in the camp. He had been singled out because he was a boy. He was also young, and he was going to become part of the slave labor camp. His life turned into a long nightmare. As a faithful little Jewish boy, there he gave up his faith. He could never forget the smoke. He could never forget the small faces of the children whose bodies he saw transformed by that anti-Semitic hate. Those flames consumed Elie's faith as well, and it did it forever. Elie Wiesel, he lost his desire to live. He could never forget those moments that murdered his God, murdered his own soul, murdered his own family, and turned his dreams into nothing but ashes. His mother and father had him grow up full of stories, belief in the Jewish Bible, At Auschwitz, they all left him, and his heart was full of ashes. Those beautiful biblical stories, they were torn from his heart, and his faith in God vanished, and his spirit was killed. Elie Wiesel's story doesn't end there. I'm going to come back to it at the end of the lesson, so stay by. Back to Isaiah's sermon. Like the Nazis surrounding the Roman village, there are the Assyrians surrounding Jerusalem. Here comes Isaiah's message. Unto you a child is born, and unto you a son is given. What's Isaiah talking about? He's going to tell his people God's story. Then Isaiah is going to fill in the details. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. And there's more here really than meets the eye. This child that is born, he's going to be pretty special. The government will be upon his shoulder, it says, and of the increase of his government and peace, there's going to be no end. This thing isn't going to stop. God starts out where we start. A child is born. God steps into history. He becomes one with us so that we become one with him. God doesn't tease us with mystery. It's pretty straightforward. Here he is with us in Jesus, God's way of revealing himself to us and giving himself to us in his Son. That idea saves us from a lot of trouble. A child is born among us. Remember the words of the angel at Christmas time in that shepherd's voice there on the hillsides of Bethlehem? For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the King. C.S. Lewis, he put it this way. In the Christian story, God descended. He comes down from the heights to the very root of a child, bringing a ruined world up to himself. Isaiah's sermon is going to describe itself through 4 names. Through that child that is coming, I'm going to mention the names, and then I'm going to go back and I'll describe them. No one has ever been called these names before as a leader. Here they are. 1, Wonderful Counselor. 2, he's going to be called the Mighty God. 3, he's going to be called the Everlasting Father. And finally 4, he's going to be called the Prince of Peace. Let's take a look at them. Here's the first one. First name, Wonderful Counselor. When that son is given, he's going to take over. And he's going to run the world. And his ruling authority will grow, and it's going to have no limits. He'll rule from his kingdom historic throne of David, his predecessor. David's throne over his promised kingdom, and there'll be fair dealings. There's going to be right living. And his beginning will have no ending. In this sermon of Isaiah, his first name for God's Son is Wonderful Counselor. That's the opposite of dictator. He'll listen when you talk. He comprehends our needs and he helps us find ways to meet them. He'll even pay attention to us because he made us significant. You and I are important, and to him we're quite unique. Up until now, you've lived with no zest. Neither have I. But watch out. His Son is going to instill in you a brand new will, and you'll never be the same again. That's what Wonderful Counselor means. Here's a second name of that son that was born. He's going to be called Mighty God. Here's what God's Son will do for you. What he says he'll do, and he will. He's going to conquer sin. And then he's going to defeat the evil enemy that's out to cripple you. And when he does that, guess what happens? After he sets the world straight again, the result, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And he has now become the mighty God in that new kingdom. He'll be the good shepherd who gives his life for his sheep. John 3:16. He loved the world so much that he gave his son to die for me. How's that for mighty God? Here's a third name. Everlasting Father. Remember, God is the existence. He's the author of our existence. Our origin comes from him. And that's going to continue right on through eternity. He's not going to be absent when we're in eternity. He's going to be there with me. We'll live with him and he's going to live with us. And we'll never start each day in his new kingdom without that everlasting Father. Look for something to keep us going. Our happiness, our entertainment, he's going to provide it. And we're going to find tremendous fulfillment and worth that you haven't had down on earth. You're going to find that worth when you cross the border. Here finally is the fourth name for God's Son. He's going to be called the Prince of Peace. When the Prince rules, peace develops. It'll be thorough and it'll be complete. Peace and harmony will be a perfect fit. And you and I, in order to get rid of irritation, hoping to bring peace, what do? I get peace, I think, a lot of the time by shouting. But that doesn't do me any good, because when I shut up, I begin to think, what did I learn with that? I don't want to hear any more. That kind of behavior. God gets peace by saying, be still and know that I am God. He said that in Psalm 46:10. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. Here was Isaiah's vision. The child doesn't remain a baby. Those four names that he's acquired, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, all tell what's wrong with our world. People who don't see what's described by Isaiah are going to walk in darkness. But those that see it, men and women, they're going to see a great light. Isaiah 9, verse 2. Our world stumbles in darkness because they're oblivious of the light. Isaiah's vision becomes the fulfillment of the history of Christ's coming. Born in Bethlehem, in a manger, walked in Galilee, touching, feeding, speaking, healing all those that came to him. And now he's present among us, mighty to save. Twice in the course of Isaiah's vision, in chapter 9, the word increase is used. Near the beginning you read, you have increased its joy, and they rejoice because before thee is the joy of the harvest. And then he goes on and he says in verse 9, near the end of the vision, of the increase of his government and peace, there's going to be no end. Verse 7, at harvest time, it's not going to run out. It's not going to be exhausted. What I'm going to give you week by week, year by year, throughout that whole eternity will just keep coming and going. Of the increase, there will be no end. Ashley was only 13 years old. Like Jerusalem, she had an enemy at her gate. The enemy was liver failure. She had been sick for most of her 13 years of this life. The doctors found a solution, however, to save her life. Her mother was a liver match for a liver transplant. She could donate half of her liver to her daughter, Ashley, and she didn't hesitate. As a matter of fact, she didn't even think about the risk. She didn't want to know about it, how it would affect her. Long recoverings and complications. Well, she avoided all those articles. She didn't read them. Her daughter's needs always came first. Never once did she think of her and her own needs. So, the hospital was secured. Transplant team was put in place. The date was set. And then the days were counted when little Ashley would finally feel relief from her emaciated, jaundiced body, Mary, the mother of Ashley, went into surgery. Still joking, still smiling, relieved that that long wait was finally over. That morning, after their 10-hour transplant, all Mary, the mother, wanted to know was, how was her daughter doing? Was she any better? Was she now alert? Was she breathing okay? Did she have any pain? She got an update on her condition, and she was shown a few digital pictures. And then it happened. A shot of pain took hold of Mary, the mother, and it wouldn't let go. She could hardly breathe. She broke into a sweat. She cried for relief. In rushed the nurses. 30 minutes, several medications later, she could breathe again. And then it struck her. It finally all made sense. For 13 years, Mary selfishly had taken care of her little Ashley. No one else could give her what she had just given, one half of her liver. And with each new breath, she now realized her own intrinsic value in that process of the liver transplant. She finally thought of herself for a while. She, like her daughter, was now a patient in the same hospital. Now she had to work on blood and those blood clots. She had to work on her own infections and the caring for her own lungs and her own digestive tract. Mary had to now mother herself. And it wasn't long before she could take her own first steps. And then came her first ride in the wheelchair. Just to look at her daughter's eyes, and then to hear her daughter whisper to her, "Oh, Mommy, I love you." 2 weeks later, they were both discharged from the hospital. Mary held Ashley in her arms. 6 months later, she watched her run and she watched her laugh. Her heart was full of joy. They both made it. They were both now going to be moving on. Not only did Ashley have a new life that matters, so did Mary, her mother. That liver transplant for Ashley was Isaiah's Christmas message for the whole nation of the Jews. For unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given. And he's going to rule, and his kingdom will increase, because this earth will now have been governed by a leader that they have never heard or seen before as good as this. His name is going to be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Remember I started this lesson with a story about Elie Wiesel, that Romanian 15-year-old from that little village who was arrested along with his mom and his dad and his little sister. They were Jews, sent to Auschwitz, that concentration camp, but only Elie Wiesel survived. All his dreams became ashes. After the war, Elie Wiesel, he survived, left Europe, and he moved to the United States. He had to start all over again. No father, no mother, no little sister. In his own words, he says, "My eyes had opened, and I was alone in a world without God and without man to understand who I was or where I came from. Without love, no mercy, I was nothing but ashes," he said. And then Elie Wiesel got to thinking, as he grew older, what would my mother and my father want me to do? Remember, he gave up his faith. He didn't believe in Yahweh anymore. Well, he began reading his Hebrew Bible. And he fell in love with the prophet Isaiah, the one I've just been telling you about. He read chapter 9. that there was a new king coming, and that king was going to be better than Hitler, who had destroyed his family. He began reading the stories again that his parents had taught him from his Bible. And then he began that battle from within. We Jews, he felt, we were firmly connected to Yahweh our God. But we were slaughtered on the most civilized continent on the world, Europe. The orders for the execution were given by persons who listened to Mozart music in the evenings. And they were educated in the best universities on earth. We even sang the Lutheran hymns in church on Sundays. Elie Wiesel, hearing that and knowing that, didn't care. He read his Bible that his parents had. He began to tell the stories to himself like his mother and dad told to him. And he remembered all those stories in that little that Romanian synagogue. Those remarks that the rabbi had told him about David, Daniel, Isaiah, Ezekiel, they suddenly all came back and they began to make sense. Elie Wiesel in America, he started attending synagogue again in the new country. He then began to tell his stories to strangers in that synagogue of why he left God and why God left him. And everybody listened to him. How strange that a person who didn't believe in God anymore was suddenly being heard to be told who God is. He wrote a book about it. He called it The Messengers of God. Those were the narratives of Abraham, Moses, Joseph, Job. The turnaround was soul-catching. That Lazarus-like figure now moved into a world with stories of dead Jews, but they had a story and they had life. God wasn't dead. He's now telling stories about a person who had lived in faith in God. And he would tell his audience, there's nothing as worthwhile as searching the scriptures and questioning your own faith and then finding him all over again. Here was now a man who lost everything as a young boy and an adolescent. Every shred of faith pulled away from him and his soul completely dead, leaving it bare and shivering in a world that didn't care. And then he discovered it all over again. That's what Isaiah was telling in chapter 9 of his book to these people who are going to be overrun by the Assyrians. Elie Wiesel liked the word midrash. It's a Hebrew word that means seek out. Remember how I started the lesson? In that day, the root of Jesse shall stand as an ensign to the people, and unto him shall the gathering of the nations seek. Seek was a root word that Isaiah used in his vision. Well, as Christians, we know that the shoot that came from the tribe into that shoot of Jesse, that was God's Son, Jesus Christ. God said, unto him shall the nations be seeking. I hope you seek him. This Christmas, if you're looking for something really special, think of what you can find in chapter 9 of Isaiah. A son was born, and unto that son he gave the rulership of mankind. That's not a bad Christmas present. Well, that's enough for today. Come on back next week. I'll have something new for you. Thanks for joining me.